I remember when I turned 40, our sons were 4 and 6 years old at the time, and Linda and I went on a trip to Paris to mark this big turning point in my life. I was happy. Life was good. But I also had lost my imagination for what the rest of my life could look like. Deep inside, I had a sense of surrender, complacency. Maybe part of it was being tired after 6 years of parenting very lovable, but also very energetic children. Looking back, I believe I was putting more of my psychic into what was no longer possible versus all that was possible in the years to come. In those years that followed, I moved into a decade-long career as a professional in higher education, as well as a decade of volunteering and professional leadership in the LGBTQ community. And years later, I pursued a path to ministry. Throughout that time, Linda and I grew deeply connected to Unity Church Unitarian, which was our church home. And even though our lives were busy, we kept saying yes to new possibilities. Yes to spiritual deepening and leadership. Yes to small groups and volunteer opportunities and religious education. Yes to bringing our kids over to clear out a garden. Linda will recall that ended up with almost having to go to the hospital when Corbin hit his head on a wall. Yes to a journey to Transylvania and weekend-long trainings on anti-racism. Yes to being on the board of trustees and to leading the GLBT allies group and the marriage amendment work that was done by that congregation. I realized that my connection to the life of churches I've attended and work at is beyond that of what many of you may feel or have energy to serve. I also know that there are more than a few of you who share this continual yes orientation. I opened a book on congregational change that was directed at ministers last night, and a phrase jumped off the page. Do not expect others to share the same passion about church that you have. Yikes. But here's the deal. We know that a large percentage of you give your times and skill and financial resources to keep MSUS alive, and that you're working to help it continue to thrive. So many of you actually do share this passion. You have held this place with care and hope and with commitment throughout the years of being connected to MSUS, and you're ready to bring it into the future. Today, with Jess joining us and Lisa, the part-time ministerial intern, joining us soon, I feel a renewed sense of possibility for MSUS. Last year, you and the board created new value statements and end statements which serve as a vision of where we're going, what we long to be in the world. The board is using our missions and values and end statements as a guide to understand what impact we can make in the years to come. We'll be gathering leaders next Tuesday, and the board will gather on August 8th. They and I and the staff will move beyond the words of our missions and values and visionary statements and cultivate the muscle of radical imagination. This phrase, cultivate the muscles of radical imagination, is a phrase I recently read in a book called Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change and Changing Worlds by Adrian Moore. Radical imagination. We are entering a church year. For those of you who have not been with Michael Servetus Unitarian Society for long, the church year is aligned with the school year. So we're entering this church year with COVID-19 spiking and death rates beyond our ability to absorb. Parents and teachers and employers are anxiously awaiting to learn what will happen in terms of schools and colleges. The most important presidential election of our lifetimes is 3 months away, and faith communities like ours are acknowledging that we may not be together in person for a long time. That's a lot. It's a list that you've heard repeated over and over again in the media and in conversations. This is an unprecedented time during our lives, and it is tempting to give way to despair, feeling overwhelmed, fear, and being disengaged. However, there's little room for possibility with that perspective. We have to crack through the wall of despair and find hope. Find small and meaningful ways to counter feeling overwhelmed and engage despite our desire to spend another day in bed or reading a book or sitting and watching TV or listening to the radio. As I mentioned, Jess and I took an afternoon last week and we set off to visit families who are part of our religious education program. We stood and sat in lawn chairs with 6 families. I can't tell you the joy I felt in seeing people in the flesh gabbing away with young children and learning a bit about what was up with our teens. The visits, they made me feel the impact of being separated in a really deep and profound way. Literally, my body and my heart remembered one of the greatest joys of being part of MSUS, which is that we really are a community of all ages. I really miss that. Jess and I really don't know what's possible in terms of religious education. We know that radical imagination will be required, and we know that there are things that might flop and others that might have impact. Realistically, we know that connection, love, and transformation often happen in small increments of trust and joy, authenticity, finding meaning, and acting on one's values and beliefs. I'm struck by how energized and hopeful I feel with the beginning of this church year so soon upon us. I'm struck by how clear I am that in order for MSUS to continue to become what is possible, there must be a depth of shared ministry. On our visits, Jess shared a phrase that they have come to speak to congregations. I think it goes something like this. They'll probably correct me later on. There is what we need, and there is what we're willing to do to make it happen. Okay, as I said, I'm sure that's not perfect, but you get the idea. There's things we need, and then there's also the need to have the willingness to make it happen. Small congregations have so much strength, many of which you have all articulated in small group meetings with Katie held online last spring or in congregational gatherings over the past few years. There really is a vibrancy and a joy and care that is evident every time we gather in person or even when we're on Zoom. You are willing to be vulnerable and take risk, show up and deepen connections. And yet, since I've been with you, there have been a few things that are continual areas of stress and discomfort. One is around money, which is not unusual, and different perceptions about what's appropriate funding sources to balance the operating budget and what's not. I'm not going to go into that today. But the second is around leadership and filling teams and committees so that they can be part of accomplishing the work that keeps our community well managed and progressing towards its dreams. We always seem to be a little shy of all that we hope for. Yet I really want us to take time to reflect back and recognize that much has been done, much has been shared, and much has been transformed. Over the past 4 years, there have been some mighty blows, if I'm being honest, especially around identifying alternate church buildings and the congregation voting twice to not move forward. There's been a psychological and spiritual cost because of these votes. And yet, several of you have stated recently, aren't you glad that we didn't buy that building in light of the COVID situation we are now in? I can't say honestly that I reply yes. Both of the buildings, though far from perfect, opened a sense of possibility in me, a possibility that struck a place deep in my heart and spirit, even if I couldn't adequately articulate it to you as the congregation. But I'm not giving up on what's possible. Being away from the MSUS building has empowered me to think beyond the walls of the church. As several people outside of MSUS have said, the church isn't the building, the church is the people. This is true, and yet the bricks and mortar that provide a space for gathering as our multi-generational community, playing music, worshiping, and having meaningful and transformational experiences, and of course, eating together cannot be overlooked. This coming year, the board and all of you will continue the course set out by the Oakley Street Task Force and stay engaged in the important decision about whether it's possible to stay in our current church home and expand. We're going to have those conversations while we're not in the building. Leaning into the possibility. Those who attended General Assembly have noted that there's a huge effort called UU the Vote. And you'll learn more about that next week during announcements. We're continuing to lean into possibility as we study together transgender inclusion in congregations and search our hearts for the congregation we want to be. I hope someday we'll have new name tags with our preferred gender included so that all who enter the building will know that this congregation welcomes all and that folks who come in will not be misgendered. We'll be working on one or both of the certificate programs next year for being a welcoming congregation or a green sanctuary. Unlike any other time in history, we have an online opportunity to connect with other UU churches in worship and through programs. In a few weeks, we're going to give that a try by joining the Mankato UU Church for a service, and then the next week they will join us. And Eau Claire UU Fellowship has called and asked if we can do the same. And finally, the minister at Mankato and I are talking about sharing the cost of participating in an online version of Beloved Conversations. That's an in-depth program that explores the role of race and ethnicity in individual and congregational lives. I'm excited by all of this. And yet there remains a long list of projects and programs and changes to how things are managed at MSUS that have literally not budged in the past 4 years. And I'm constantly grappling with what Jess described as to what we need versus what we are, versus what I'm willing to do to make it so, and what are you willing to do to make it so. It's messy, it's real, and it's really honestly part of church life. This summer, I've gained a greater appreciation or perspective on what I really don't do well. Thank goodness for Pat Varian, who hopped in and decided to proof the news from the office. There are things in my ministry that I'm really well suited, and sometimes some of those things that might fall into an administrator and executive minister aren't really my strengths. And even in the areas where, as your minister, are my natural strengths, there's more to do than I can do alone. Shared ministry is the reality of our beautiful, small and growing church. When I hold possibility in my heart and in my mind's eye, I know that the more of us who say yes, who decide to engage, risk failure, step into discomfort and messiness, find time to hold and advance the mission and vision of this church, the more in this congregation who decide to engage, the more likely we will live into our potential and possibility. We're at such a strange time, a time when we are lured into this despair and feeling overwhelmed and fear and being disengaged. But what I ask of myself, Jeff's, Bruce, and Lisa, who all of us will hold the programmatic part of church life as staff members, is to say yes to risk, to be radically imaginative, to pay attention when our spirits are depleted, and to work towards all that it is possible, and yet step back when our mental, physical, or spiritual health is taking a toll. And I'd like to ask the same of you. As we roll out UU the Vote, which is led by Kathy Burek at this point, push yourself to say yes. Say yes to things that make you feel uncomfortable, knowing that is that we need to in order to impact November's election. I'll join you. And I can tell you some of the things we'll be asked to do will make me uncomfortable as well. If you're seeking time where you can be in the physical presence of one another, say yes to planning an hour in a park where MSUS can connect in a safe and much needed way. If you have a book or a video or an article or an idea you'd like to share with the congregation, say yes to leading a program. It can be one time or it could last for a while. If you dream of creating a more just world, whether in terms of saving our planet or pecking away at unjust systems of housing, policing, food security, transgender rights, offer a way for others to get engaged. Create a program where people can learn more, coupled with concrete ways that we can make a difference together. When Susan Frederick Gray, the president of the Unitarian Association, was elected, she articulated the call, "This is no time for a casual faith." This is no time for a casual faith. We are alive. We are part of this grace-filled community, and we are called to work in the land of possibility. Do not settle for what is, but imagine what can be and help to make it so. We need not move mountains. We can't become all we want to be in a year or two, or maybe even a decade. But if we're healthy and engaged and always looking towards more possibility, we will deepen that which makes this community and those who are connected sacred. We will continue to find our church home a place that embraces more, engages in the world, and can create change. What I'm asking is not to get hooked into that feeling that I had when I was 40. The good is enough, this is it. I can't see anything more than what I see today. The past years were the best years, and I have to accept that what is ahead is a little duller type of mentality. New chapters are being written all the time. And we, as a small and vibrant community of MSUS, have the potential to craft our own wonderful, connected, engaged, transformed, justice-making, beloved future together. So what small step might you take to make it so? We need all of us, in large and small ways, with open hearts, great spirits, and courage to make it so. Amen. So, I don't know if I thought of a question specifically. I am kind of wondering about, somewhat following on Jess's question, but times you've said yes, even when you were reluctant or tired or couldn't see where it was going. And how did entering into that messiness help transform you or help deepen your spirit and connection to one another or to the universe? No small question. So when have you said yes to something you may have not been inclined to say yes to? And how did that impact or transform you as you were working to make the world a better place and connect with the universe? Katie will lead the conversation by looking for folks who would like to share. We can only have a few because we're running long today.
I see Bruce and Marie. It looks like Marie, not Bruce, is raising her hand.
This starts out being a more personal thing, but I realize that it's gone further. Previous to the job I'm in right now, I was in a job that was so stressful. I had a boss who was very abusive, actually. I've been out of it now about 2.5 years. In that interim, I talked to so many people at MSUS that really helped me feel like I was sane. And the community at MSUS is just incredible. Right now, even if I'm crying, I feel so much better having this community. And thank you all.
It reminds me, Marie, that sometimes saying yes needs a chorus of angels or people who are surrounding you to give you the strength to say, I'm making a change. Is there anybody else who'd like to share before we move on?
This is Katie. I'll just share. There's a couple times that I've said yes to some leadership things that I thought I was in no way prepared for, but the one that really had the biggest impact on me with MSUS, and this is not really a plug for someone else to do the pledge drive, but I just gotta say, I was asked to do the pledge drive, kind of Byron and me, but it was kind of going to be me. But Byron stepped in and it was wonderful. I started out, this was just, okay, this is a thing that needs to be done. Fine. I'll do it. I can do it. I can figure out how to do it. I don't know what's doing, but that step into looking at gratitude and generosity just was really transformative for me. Maybe it's because of the way I approach things, because the first thing I did was start reading. And so I read some very inspiring things, but I really have changed my own attitude from a sense of scarcity to a sense of abundance. And that has made a big change in me. And I was totally not expecting that. I was just gonna, fill the slot where something needed to be done. And I even today, I'm kind of amazed at how that changed me.
Katie, I would just like to add that not only did it change you, but it helped, I think, infuse the congregation with a sense about exploring what generosity really meant in our own lives and how it does change us. So thank you. All right, unfortunately, Katie, I think I'm going to move on just due to time. I have included a song that follows, which came from, which I thought about when I listened to a podcast of the show On Being in preparation for today. Krista Tippett was interviewing Vincent Harding, who is the chairperson of Veterans for Hope Project and at the Iliff School of Theology. Actually, he died in 2014. He was also a leading figure in the civil rights movement, and he shared how the civil rights movement wasn't only politically vigorous, but it was spiritually vigorous as well. And he reminded us that the ultimate goal of that movement was beloved community, not just to be tolerant and be an integrated society. So this song, Woke Up This Morning, was included in the podcast, and the idea of having our minds stayed on freedom reminds me of the tenacity and hope it takes to continue to engage in possibility.